Two women walk into the same doctor's office on the same day, same age, same weight, same clothing size. On paper, they look identical. But one of them has a body quietly running years younger than her actual age, and the other is carrying a hidden risk that the scale will never show her. The difference between them isn't visible from the outside, and it isn't something either of them would ever guess just by stepping on a bathroom scale. Welcome back to Medical Insight, where we take the numbers, tests, and terms your doctor rarely has time to fully explain and break them down in plain English. We've already uncovered the blood pressure number most people overlook, the blood sugar number that can warn you years before diabetes ever gets diagnosed, and the full story hiding behind your cholesterol panel. Today, we're looking at a number that might matter more than any of those when it comes to weight and long-term health, and it's almost never explained to the people who actually need to hear it. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which side of that story your own number is quietly telling right now. Your smart scale doesn't just show you a weight. If it has body composition sensors, it probably also shows you something called metabolic age, usually buried near the bottom of the screen, often ignored completely. It's the number your scale calculates but never actually explains. And once you understand what it's really telling you, you'll never scroll past it again. Metabolic age isn't your real age. It's a comparison. Your body burns a certain number of calories every single day just to stay alive, keeping your heart beating, your organs functioning, your cells repairing themselves, even while you're sitting completely still. That number is called your basal metabolic rate. Researchers have measured what basal metabolic rate typically looks like across different ages, creating an average for every stage of life. Your scale takes your own basal metabolic rate, compares it against those age-based averages, and hands you back a single number. If your metabolism performs like the average 30-year-old's, your metabolic age comes back around 30, no matter what your birth certificate says. If it performs like a 55-year-old's, that's the number staring back at you instead, even if you're only 35. Here's what actually drives that number behind the scenes. Muscle tissue burns significantly more energy at rest than fat tissue does. So the more lean muscle you're carrying, the higher your resting metabolic rate tends to be, and the younger your metabolic age tends to look. The reverse is also true. Less muscle, more fat at the same body weight, and your metabolic age climbs, even while the number on the scale stays exactly the same. This is exactly where sarcopenia enters the picture, a term you've probably never heard, even though it's happening inside most adults right now without anyone mentioning it. According to research compiled by the National Institutes of Health, adults begin gradually losing muscle mass as early as their 30s, a process that continues quietly for decades unless it's actively countered. Nobody feels this happening day to day. There's no sudden moment where you notice muscle disappearing. It's slow, invisible, and almost never explained, which is exactly why so many people's metabolic age keeps climbing year after year, even when their weight barely moves at all. This is also why two people can weigh the exact same amount and still be living in completely different metabolic realities. One person's body might be quietly holding on to muscle through the years. The others might be losing it steadily, replaced by fat, without either of their bathroom scales ever showing the difference. The scale sees total weight. It has no idea what that weight is actually made of. So the next time your smart scale flashes that metabolic age number and moves on like it's nothing, don't scroll past it. That number is trying to tell you something your body weight alone never could. Sarah and Michelle both weigh exactly 160 pounds, same height, same clothing size, same BMI. If you look them up on a standard chart, they'd get the exact same label, the exact same category, the exact same generic advice handed out at the doctor's office. But underneath that identical number, their bodies are living two completely different stories. Sarah has spent the last several years doing regular strength training, twice a week, nothing extreme. A meaningful portion of her 160 pounds is lean muscle. Michelle has led a mostly sedentary lifestyle over that same stretch of years, and a much larger share of her 160 pounds comes from fat rather than muscle. Stand them side by side on a scale, and it tells you absolutely nothing about this difference. It simply can't. The scale only measures total mass, and total mass has no way of revealing what that mass is actually made of. Here's where it gets interesting. Because muscle burns more energy at rest than fat does, Sarah's resting metabolism is running noticeably higher than Michelle's, even though they weigh the same amount. That means Sarah's metabolic age likely comes back close to her actual age or even younger. Michelle's, on the other hand, could come back a full decade older despite the identical number on the scale. And according to research referenced by metabolic health specialists, that gap in muscle-to-fat ratio doesn't just affect a number on a screen. It correlates with real differences in insulin sensitivity, cardiovascular risk, and long-term disease risk between the two of them, risk that never once showed up in either of their weekly weigh-ins. This is exactly the blind spot the CDC has acknowledged about BMI itself. The agency has stated plainly that BMI, while useful as a broad screening tool across large populations, does not account for body composition. It cannot tell the difference between a highly muscular person and a person carrying a high percentage of body fat, even when their BMI numbers land in the exact same category. Sarah and Michelle could both be told, your BMI is fine, or your BMI is a concern, and that single verdict would completely miss the real story unfolding underneath. This is also why the scale has quietly frustrated so many people who are doing everything right. If you've ever put in weeks of consistent strength training, felt stronger, noticed your clothes fitting differently, and then stepped on the scale only to see the exact same number as before, you already know this feeling firsthand. It isn't failure. It's very likely muscle replacing fat in real time, a genuinely positive shift that the scale is structurally incapable of showing you because it was never designed to measure composition in the first place. So here's a question worth sitting with. If you've ever felt discouraged by a scale that refused to move, despite real, consistent effort on your part, does it change things to realize the number itself may have simply been blind to the exact progress you were making? Remember that hidden number we uncovered a few videos ago? The one that could quietly predict diabetes years before any doctor ever said the word? A 1C. It turns out that same slow-building process is directly tied to the number we're talking about today, and almost nobody connects the two. Here's the link. Insulin is the hormone responsible for pulling sugar out of your bloodstream and delivering it into your cells for energy. Muscle tissue happens to be one of the biggest destinations for that sugar. The more muscle mass you have, the more places your body has to send blood sugar efficiently, which means your cells don't have to work as hard and your insulin doesn't have to shout as loud to keep everything balanced. Less muscle mass means fewer places for that sugar to go, which forces your pancreas to produce more and more insulin just to manage the same load. This is the exact mechanism behind insulin resistance, the same slow, invisible process that eventually shows up as a rising A1C, sometimes years before a diagnosis ever gets made. So metabolic age and A1C aren't separate stories at all. They're two different windows looking into the same underlying process. A higher metabolic age, driven by lower muscle mass, often shows up alongside the exact kind of insulin resistance that quietly pushes A1C upward year after year, long before fasting blood sugar ever raises a flag. The same connection shows up again with cholesterol, specifically with triglycerides, the number we talked about as the most overlooked line on an entire lipid panel. Triglycerides reflect how efficiently your body processes the sugars and fats you take in. Muscle tissue plays a direct role in that processing, pulling glucose out of the bloodstream and putting it to use instead of letting it convert into stored fat. Lower muscle mass, the same lower muscle mass reflected in a higher metabolic age, often shows up alongside elevated triglycerides, even when total calorie intake hasn't changed at all. This is exactly why metabolic age isn't just another isolated number floating on its own. It's connected to nearly everything we've already covered on this channel. The same muscle loss that pushes your metabolic age higher is often quietly influencing your insulin sensitivity and your triglyceride numbers at the very same time. 3 seemingly separate lab values, all tracing back to one shared root cause happening underneath the surface. If you haven't watched our video on A1C or the full breakdown of your cholesterol panel yet, this is exactly the moment where those pieces click into place. They were never really separate numbers. They're different reflections of the same underlying story your body has been quietly writing for years, and metabolic age might be the thread connecting all of them together. 2 people decide to spend the next year improving their metabolic health. One of them commits to running 4 times a week, nothing but steady cardio, consistent and disciplined about it. The other splits their time between 2 or 3 short resistance training sessions a week, along with paying closer attention to protein intake. A year later, only one of them has meaningfully moved their metabolic age, and it might not be the one you'd expect. Cardio is genuinely valuable for cardiovascular health, and nobody's suggesting you should drop it. But when it comes to metabolic age specifically, resistance training does something cardio alone typically doesn't. It builds and preserves the muscle mass that basal metabolic rate is actually built on. Research summarized by Harvard Health Publishing has consistently pointed to strength-based exercise as one of the most effective tools for maintaining or increasing muscle mass as we age, often outperforming cardio-only routines when the specific goal is preserving resting metabolic rate over time. Running burns calories in the moment, but it doesn't build the kind of muscle tissue that keeps your metabolism elevated hour after hour, even while you're sitting still. This doesn't require anything extreme. You don't need to become a competitive lifter or spend 2 hours a day in a gym. 2 or 3 sessions a week focused on major muscle groups, consistently repeated over months rather than weeks, is enough to start shifting the underlying muscle mass that metabolic age is actually measuring. Protein plays a supporting role that's just as important as the training itself. Muscle tissue requires adequate protein to repair and rebuild after each session. And as we age, our bodies naturally become slightly less efficient at using the protein we consume, meaning the amount that felt sufficient in your 20s may not be enough to maintain muscle in your 40s or 50s. Pairing consistent resistance training with adequate protein intake tends to produce noticeably better results than either change attempted entirely on its own. Here's what makes this so encouraging. Unlike some health markers that feel stubborn or slow to shift no matter what you do, metabolic age responds directly and measurably to these 2 changes, and it often starts moving faster than people expect. This isn't a number you're stuck with. It's a number that reflects choices you're actively making right now, which means it's also a number you have real immediate influence over. So here's a question worth asking yourself honestly. If building 2 or 3 short strength sessions into your week could shift a number tied to insulin sensitivity, cardiovascular risk, and long-term disease risk all at once, would that change how you prioritize your workouts compared to relying on cardio alone? If you don't have access to a body composition scanner, you don't need one to start improving this number. Some gyms offer them, some doctors' offices have them, and even certain home smart scales now estimate body composition reasonably well. If you have access to one, checking your metabolic age every few months, rather than obsessing over any single reading, gives you a genuinely useful trend line instead of just a one-time snapshot. But here's the more important truth. You don't need the exact number in front of you to start improving what it measures. If getting tested isn't convenient or available to you right now, the path forward is exactly the same either way. 2 or 3 resistance training sessions a week, focused on the major muscle groups, paired with enough protein to actually support that muscle as it rebuilds. That's the entire mechanism driving this number, whether or not you ever see it printed on a screen. Start simply if you need to. Bodyweight squats, push-ups, or resistance bands at home count just as much as a gym membership does, especially in the beginning. What matters far more than the specific method is consistency. Showing up 2 or 3 times a week after week, long enough for your body to actually respond and start rebuilding the muscle it's been quietly losing. This is really the whole point of understanding metabolic age in the first place. It was never meant to be something to fear or feel discouraged by. It's meant to be something you have real direct influence over, starting with choices available to you today, regardless of your current age, your current weight, or what your bathroom scale happens to say this morning. So instead of walking away from this video worried about a number you can't see, walk away with a plan you can actually start acting on, one that doesn't require special equipment, a diagnosis, or anyone else's permission to begin. Here's Sarah and Michelle again, standing side by side, same weight, same clothing size, same BMI. By now, you know their story isn't the same story at all. The scale saw 2 identical numbers. It never saw the muscle, the metabolism, or the years of quiet risk building differently underneath each of them. That's the whole point of this video. Your weight is a number, but it was never the full picture, and it never will be. Metabolic age pulls back the curtain on everything the scale can't show you, and it connects directly to the blood sugar story we uncovered with A1C and the triglyceride story hiding in your cholesterol panel. 3 numbers, 1 shared thread, all quietly telling you the same underlying truth about how your body is actually functioning beneath the surface. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Have you ever had your metabolic age tested, whether at a gym, a doctor's office, or on a home scale? And did the numbers surprise you one way or the other? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and it genuinely shapes which hidden numbers we break down next. If this helped you understand why the scale alone was never telling you the whole story, that's exactly what this channel exists to do. We've covered blood pressure, blood sugar, cholesterol, and now the real story behind weight and metabolism. There's still more hiding in plain sight, numbers you've probably seen before without ever fully understanding, and we're going to keep uncovering them one at a time. If you're new here, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if this series has already helped you make sense of your own lab work or your own body, consider sharing it with someone who's been just as frustrated by a stubborn scale as you might have been. I'll see you in the next video.